Hi, Reading Adam here, and today we're going to talk about reasons not to read. So, it's a very interesting topic. I mean, how often does anybody ever Google, why should I not read? Nobody ever talks about the negative of reading. Are there negatives to reading? Is it possible that when you're reading, you're actually misusing your time? Now, it's easy to say that, no, I'm not misusing my time. Reading is always beneficial at all times. It's way better than most other things you can do in your free time or even at work, because there are lots of things that you're reading that might be applicable to you. But what's the point of reading something? What's the real difference between something applicable to you and something not applicable to you? So again, this is where we come into reasons not to read, because there are many reasons to read, but on the opposite end, reasons not to read, there are a few. So this is mostly an intellectual exercise. I just want to understand better myself by first understanding what not to read. Maybe it'll be better and easier to understand what to read. So here's reason number one I could think of. Don't read educational material for entertainment. So don't do it. Don't read educational material for pure entertainment. It's the reason is this: you're wasting your time. Education material is meant to be studied. It's meant to be understood and learned so that you can utilize it in your life. So, for instance, why would you ever read a book on how to use Photoshop if you never plan on using Photoshop, right? You might be, oh, well, I'm interested. Maybe there's stuff that'll be applicable to other areas of my life. No, you're wasting your time. You're wasting your time. Same thing is if you're reading a book on logic and you're just doing a skim through because you're like, I wonder if I can pick up some points real quick. No, because logic requires a lot of time to study and think about and practice. So if you're reading educational material for entertainment or even self-help material for entertainment, you're not going to get anywhere with it. And that material is meant to get you somewhere. And if it's you that keeps yourself from getting anywhere with it. So it's kind of like, why would you read a software manual for software that you A, will never use, or B, it's out of date. Maybe you can't get it anymore, or nobody uses it, something to that effect. So that's one reason not to read. Don't read stuff that's not going to do anything for you. Another reason not to read, and this is a completely different kind of area, is to stay unbiased. So a lot of people who are biased with a certain political ideology or a certain economic ideology or religious ideology, any ideology, you're gonna become biased the more you read. The more authors you read, the more arguments you read, the more you're gonna kind of think like those people. So why are certain books censored? Why would the Chinese censor Jefferson and John Locke? Because people will acquire that capitalist mentality, the bias behind that. They'll read how others reasoned it and thought about it, and then they themselves might also adopt some of that thinking to their own lives. So if you want to remain unbiased, you got to be ignorant. The ignorant are unbiased. If you suddenly hear about something that you've never heard before, like let's say you you touch down on Mars and there's a civilization there, and the civilization has two competing factors for political power. The wonks and the barbus. Let's just make up words there. So you touch down for the sake of not creating a story out of this. You haven't taken sides with either the wonks or the barbus, and you don't know what either of them are about. You're completely ignorant of them. You're totally unbiased. Once you start reading material from the wonks, you might become a little biased toward the wonks, especially if they create a very strong impression on you and have great rhetoric, and they seem very believable, and they seem like great people. And then by the time you get around to barbu information, you might be more critical of it. You might be more wary of their arguments. So if you want to stay unbiased, don't read. But people tend to read things that they agree with already, and also if they read something they disagree with, it actually makes them double down on their own beliefs. It makes their beliefs stronger. So if I'm a creationist and I read a book on evolution, that will make my creationist views stronger. It usually won't change my mind, won't change anyone's mind. Some people, their minds can be changed, but the way their mind is changed is through cognitive dissonance. So they have to have weird feelings of something's not quite right. You can only deny reality for so long before you change your mind. But there are lots of things where you don't have to pay attention to reality to change your mind on it. So you might be permanently biased because there's no way to confirm or deny your Muslim belief or your Christian belief, no matter where you are in the world or what people you're with. You'll always have a certain degree of bias. So that's another reason not to read, is to remain unbiased. As soon as you open a book, and this reminds me of what I was just mentioning. So as soon as you open a book, a professor of mine talked about this before with Martin Luther and the Reformation. It was, so the Protestants, so Martin Luther had this theology called sola scriptura. So sola scriptura meant that only the Bible was the source of theological conclusions. So what a priest says, or what the church tradition says, or what people see in a vision or whatever, throw all that out. Throw all that out. That's no good. Only what's in the Bible is available to create theology out of. However, my professor made a point like, okay, to have true sola scriptura, all you have is just the Bible sitting there. It's just sitting there. Nobody opens it. Nobody opens it. Nobody touches it. Nobody peeks in. Because as soon as anybody reads something from it, their own biases are going to pollute that and damage the purity of the text. So to have a pure text, to have a pure sola scriptura, nobody can ever read it. Nobody can ever look at it. That's the only way to keep it totally pure, because every human being has their own biases. So if you want to stay unbiased, don't even learn about a certain area. If you want to never have an opinion on economic policy, don't ever read anything on economic policy. Don't ever read or listen to anything if you want to truly stay unbiased. Now, of course, that calls into the question of, is it we should just accept that everyone has bias and deal with it. Learn ways to work around it. Learn ways to work with it, because nobody is unbiased. Anybody who claims to be unbiased is lying to you. Calls into the question of the legitimacy of being unbiased. Is it possible? Is it reasonable to be unbiased? is it necessary? Humankind seems to survive just fine with biases. So that was point number 2. Point number 3, a reason not to read, is to reduce the amount of information swirling in your mind, in your head. Information overload, information glut. There's too much information out there. There are too many things to learn about, to read about. There are so many stories. There are so many different kinds of worlds. I mean, one reason why when I actually started reading, I read Star Wars novels because I already knew the world. I didn't have to construct in my mind what the Star Wars universe looked like. So I didn't want to read Isaac Asimov or someone else and have to recreate brand new, like have to overthink and figure out, what kind of world is this that he's created. So if you have tons of information, I mean, the more reading you've done, and I've done a ton of reading. I've read hundreds and hundreds of books in the past decade since I decided I wanted to be a reader. And there's been so much information, and I've found it almost too much information because it prevents you from being able to specialize. It prevents you from being able to really focus in one area in life because there's too much. There's too much information. Paralysis by analysis. There are too many factors to analyze. It leads to overthinking. There's too much thought you put into various subjects you might think about, such as me right now. So it's if you want to reduce just the amount of information swirling around in your mind, like you already have so much information pooling into your mind from images and sounds and people, from television and your phone, and humans are constantly locked into information sources. So one way to reduce the amount of information pollution in your mind is to stop reading, but be specific about what you stop reading. Don't stop reading books like William and Strong Elements of Style. Don't stop reading stuff like that, because that's not gonna ruin your ability to think and reason for yourself. Stop reading articles online. Stop reading blogs online. Stop reading Facebook posts. Stop reading the things people link on Facebook. Stop reading news articles. Stop reading Reddit. Stop reading now my mind's drawing a blank, but basically the point is stop reading stuff online. Take a break from stuff online. Take a break and see if it makes any difference for you, for the energy in your mind, your mental space. Expand your mental space and mental focus on areas that are important to you right this very second, right today only, or immediate for tomorrow. So only absorb information. Maybe take a full day off of information. Maybe take a day of fasting from information. I wouldn't say you need to fast from fiction, from stories, although you can, because that's still just different forms of information that might affect you, might affect the way you think, your mood, might affect your emotions. Like, imagine when you're out camping. So you're out camping, and you're cut off from Wi-Fi. You're cut off from a cell tower. You don't have your laptop with things preloaded on it. You choose to leave your phone at home. You actually take the risk of being like, well, I need this for emergency phone calls. No, you take the risk. You leave it at home, and you're out there in nature, and you're out there unplugged from everything. You have time to think, and then time to just stew in a numbness of your mind, of not being able to retain any information, figuring out that all the stuff that's going around in your life back home is really irrelevant to you. So you don't need to know what's going on in the world around you. Like right now, Hurricane Irma's going on. I live in Ontario, so Hurricane Irma, I don't know, it might affect gas prices, maybe the price of oranges, or, it might disrupt some distribution channels, might disrupt transportation. But it really, and it's a terrible thing. Some people are suffering through a horrible weather right now, or where I don't even know if it's still going on. But do I really need to know about it? Does it matter? Like, how is that different from me learning about the earthquake that destroyed Lisbon in like the 1600s or whatever? How is it different? Well, one happened in the past. Yeah, but to me, Irma happened in the past because it's just information to me. I'm not experiencing it. And that's not to denigrate the experiences of the people who are experiencing it, because I have the capacity for empathy and I can imagine how awful that is. But I hate to say it, but it's information overload. It's too much. Like, I don't need it. I don't need to know about Hurricane Harvey. I don't need to know about Hurricane Irma. I don't care or need to know how Joel Osteen responded to the hurricane, because you know what? I know I'm never going to get the full story. I'm never going to know all the information. And that's the other thing about information glut, is there's so much information. There are so many things that one would need to know in order to have the most unbiased and most accurate opinion or facts of something, that unless you are dedicated to writing a book about it or digging into the truth, and you're a reporter and you're going to report this big story about Joel Osteen and his church and Hurricane Harvey. Like, otherwise, what does it matter? It's cheap, easy karma points for people to complain about, to basically identify their own confirmation bias and be like, "Ha! I told you that Christian man was a charlatan, and he's really truly evil and doesn't care about people, and he's only in it for the money." And there's lots of things that one can think about Joel Osteen. He's an easy target. He's an easy target because he's a rich Christian, and I heard Christians are supposed to be dirt poor. So we don't have all the information. We don't know if he was following the correct rules, regulations. Maybe he was doing the right thing by not having people in his church. I had heard that it's against FEMA regulations to open another point for storm refugees. But anyway, there you have it. Like, we don't have all the information. So if you don't have all the information, but you're absorbing these things like Hurricane Irma, or a shooting in Charlotte, or protest here, protest there, some black guy beat up a white guy, somewhere far, like 1,000 miles away, a police officer tasers an old woman in the Midwest, whatever, any of those things, you can point to that, and you'd be like, see, I told you about those people. I told you those people were no good. Or see that I told you this was going to happen. I made a prediction, and look, it happened again. Somebody else shot a police officer, or, or there's been another protest after a police officer shot someone, and I could have told you that was going to happen. I don't need to know any of that. All I need to know right now is how am I going to make my next bills? How am I going to make my next bill payments? Is there a story that I want to write? Is there a book I want to write? And what should I read that might give me ideas or expand my mind and my verbal intelligence for that? Or, what do I need to think about right now in order to create a video like this? I'm thinking about, okay, how do I present myself better? How do I sound more interested in what I'm talking about? How do I look better? Is the lighting better? I need to have better lighting. Am I close enough to the screen? Am I too far away? Like, these are immediate concerns. These are things that interest me now and would be worth thinking about. But I don't need to think about those other things. I don't need to think about news. And part of the reason why news is the way it is, like, it wasn't always this way, right? So news only, and through most of history, news only traveled as fast as a horse could go, or a human could go. But not ever since the telegraph, news was suddenly traveling at the speed of light. Excuse me, sorry about that. So all of a sudden, with the telegraph, news, and Neil Postman talks about this in his book, Amusing Ourselves to Death, which I'll do a separate video on later. I'm just going to write a quick note to myself. News travels speed greatly increased by telegraph. And so, yeah, news traveled so fast all of a sudden, but through the method of the telegraph, that's where bite-sized information came about. Headline news. So all of a sudden, people in Philadelphia were hearing up to, accurately that very same day, hearing about what's going on in New York City, which would never have happened before. And now you can find out immediately what's going on in Japan, or what's going on in China, what's going on in North Korea, what's going on in the Middle East, what's going on in South America. Like, you can find out news from anywhere in the world. And not only is there more than enough news you care to hear in your own hometown, you're saturated with news from all over the place. And you probably don't even know what's going on in your own hometown because it's not interesting, it's not entertaining in comparison. So and you have no power over those things that are far away. So that's a reason not to read. Avoid information pollution. You're reading the wrong things. You're reading too many things that are completely inapplicable to your life. They just take up brain space, mental space. They sap you of energy. They take energy from you. So think of it. Every time you open up your phone and you're like, oh, I wonder what's on Reddit now, just thinking to yourself that you're sapping and you're destroying energy and mental space that you had for today, because you only have so much for every day. And if you start off at, like, say, 100 points, every time you open up your phone, every 10 minutes you're on there, you lose a full point of mental energy. And, before you know it, okay, 6 points after an hour. But, maybe it compounds. Maybe it goes all the way to, like, 20 points if you've been doing it for a consecutive hour and you don't give yourself a break. They say that, I forget who this was, if they just cited a study or not, and that's a different topic for another time, as citations and references and so forth. But someone had mentioned that for every hour of study, you really need 10 minutes of mental space break. And not just 10 minutes of, like, okay, I'm done studying, I'm going to be on my phone. 10 minutes of just, like, meditation. 10 minutes of nothing. Stare at the wall for 10 minutes. Do nothing for 10 minutes. Like, your brain needs that reset. That's why meditation is actually quite helpful. I actually feel energized every time I meditate. even for 5-10 minutes, I feel energy because I'm not overthinking. I'm not over processing. Now, it's not like I get exhausted like a muscle, but try to read all day long, or try to be absorbed with information all day long. You'll still feel exhausted by the end of the day. So that's kind of another thing with reading the wrong things that you need to avoid. Also, don't do this. Don't read like just John Grisham or James Patterson or one of those Danielle Steele, one of those other authors. Um, I've read like one of their books before just to kind of see what all the hoopla was about, and I didn't care. I didn't care for their stories or their writing. It's like watching a TV show that you don't even remember. There's not much point to it. So one other thing I wanted to do as a final point is in a contrast. So everything I've been talking about, especially with the information glut, which is probably a boring topic by now, but I want to think, okay, so how is my channel avoid information glut? So for one thing, you'll notice I don't have any visuals. Production value is about as cheap as this could possibly get. I'm just trying to stand on my own 2 feet of being a presenter and a speaker, and I'm learning how to speak, and I'm doing it for you because I want you to gain something from this. I'm gaining something from this every time I give a talk, but I want you to gain something from this, and that is we're having a discussion. I'm having a conversation. I'm talking at you, and you're listening, but I'm trying to give you information that you can think about related to a book you read. So if I put a video on Great Expectations by Charles Dickens, I wouldn't expect you to listen to that unless you read that book. And then you can have a discussion with somebody else who has read that book. So my channels are not meant to be consumed like media, like most media, like a blog where you just, you check it every day, and then whatever it's talking about, you read that and you think about that. Some people are good enough writers and intelligent enough to keep things interesting and do that. I find even intelligent, interesting people with a lot of pull get boring after a while. So, like, for instance, not to say anything bad about him, but just using him as an example, Ramit Sethi, he's one of those online money gurus. His website is iwillteachyoutoberich.com. And I've read a ton of his material. I get his emails, and occasionally I read them. After a while, though, I'm just kind of like, no thanks. It's not that he's not interesting. It's not that he doesn't have good information. It's just I've absorbed too much of it, and I know I haven't really done much with his information, so I'm not going to keep absorbing it if I'm going to keep doing nothing with it. So how my channel is different is when I review a book, it's like, oh, okay, if I want to read that book, maybe I'll listen to the first 5 minutes of his thing and see if it's intriguing enough to read it. If I've already read the book, maybe I'll hear him out and just see, what kind of thoughts did he have about the book? Is he completely wrong, and why? Is he completely right, and why is he right? Is he discussing interesting things about the book? What did it make him think of? What did it make me think of? There's a lot of discussion to be had for a book, most books. And I try to review books that are worth discussing. I don't want to read, The Firm by John Grisham and be like, oh, let's talk about The Firm today. No, you're not going to see me review books like that. I'm trying to review stuff that might be interesting conversation, interesting discussion. And that's why my channel is worth listening to, especially as I get better at this, because my information is specific. Each video is about a specific topic. It's about a specific book, and it would be specifically applicable to you if you have also read that book or are thinking about reading that book. For instance, after I read Moby Dick, I searched on YouTube Moby Dick lecture, Moby Dick discussion, and that's how I found Harold Bloom, because he talked about Moby Dick, and he talked about how it was an epic poem, and some interesting information on it. He and I read that book very differently. I thought it was a very funny book. I thought it was basically like a textbook on whales. Half of it was. There wasn't much of a story in there. Ahab and the white whale were actually seemed like minor characters. So it was an interesting book, and I wanted to hear others talk about it because I didn't quite fully get it, and I wanted to know, what did others get from it. And that was kind of an early inkling as to what I wanted to create here. Now, what I don't want to eventually create is something like a Yale course on Don Quixote. So I read Don Quixote, and then I listened to about half of the lectures from the Yale class that studies that book specifically. It's a full class on Don Quixote, and I'm not going to study any book so in depth that I can have like a 36 course lecture series on it. If I do that, great, cool, good for me. But I don't see myself doing that. I just want to have brief discussions, some form of discussion on each book. Now, I'm talking too much about myself. I'm not doing the Dale Carnegie thing of talking about you and your interests and your needs and your reasons why you should not read. This is a little bit of a clickbaity title. That's by design. It's an intellectual exercise trying to figure out reasons not to read. At this point, I feel like I'm just kind of talking for the sake of talking. Almost like I'm just practicing keeping the flow going. I feel like I've gotten a little bit better at getting the flow going. I'm slightly better at staying on track. I can debrief this with myself after. You don't need to hear this. So again, briefly, let's go over the points again. Reasons not to read. Number 1, when you're reading educational material as entertainment. Number 2, don't read if you want to stay unbiased. Number 3, reduce the amount of information pollution in your head. And number 4, just plain reading the wrong things. So those are reasons that I've come up with. If you have reasons not to read, I'd be happy to hear them. Leave a comment below, subscribe, like this video, share it to all your friends, and I'll talk to you next time. Again, this is Reading Adam, and take care.